The message came on a Tuesday morning when Admiral Jack Morrison was drinking his coffee in the command center of Luna Base. The massive screen in front of him flickered to life with static and strange alien symbols. His coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips as the universal translator kicked in, and the symbols became words that made his blood run cold. Please help us. They are killing our children. This is the Kerani homeworld. We are peaceful. We have no weapons. The Vorthic Empire attacks us without mercy. Our cities burn. Our people die. Please, if anyone hears this, we need help. The Galactic Council will not listen. You are our last hope. The message, repeated 3 times before the screen, went dark. Admiral Morrison set down his coffee with a shaking hand and turned to his communications officer. Get me Dr. Lisa Chun from Xenobiology, now. 10 minutes later, Dr. Chun stood in the command center, her eyes wide as she watched the message. Play again. She had studied alien cultures for 20 years, but she had never seen anything like this. The Kerani were known to the scientific community as one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy. They were artists and philosophers who had never developed weapons technology. It's real, she said quietly. Every marker, every linguistic pattern, every biological indicator in their transmission confirms it. The Kerani are being slaughtered. Admiral Morrison nodded grimly and activated the secure channel to Earth. Within an hour, every major leader on Earth and the 12 human colonies had seen the message. President Sarah Martinez called an emergency session of the United Earth Government. Ambassador Kate Williams was summoned from the Galactic Council chambers, where she served as humanity's voice among the stars. The Galactic Council was an ancient organization that governed relations between the 112 known spacefaring species. Humanity had only been a member for 50 years, barely a heartbeat in galactic terms. They were considered a minor species, noteworthy only for their rapid technological advancement and their strange habit of forming emotional bonds with other species. Ambassador Williams stood before the council the next day, the Kerani distress signal playing on the massive holographic display behind her. The council chamber was filled with representatives from across the galaxy, their alien forms a testament to the diversity of life among the stars. She spoke with passion about the moral obligation to help those in need. The response was swift and dismissive. The Vorthic Empire held 3 seats on the council, their military might making them one of the dominant powers in galactic politics. The council speaker, a crystalline being from the Altari Collective, delivered the verdict in a voice like wind chimes. The council recognizes the unfortunate situation on Kerani Prime. However, the non-interference protocols are clear. Internal conflicts within sovereign space are not subject to council intervention. The matter is closed. Kate Williams felt something cold and hard form in her chest. She looked around the chamber at the alien faces, some sympathetic but unwilling to act, others coldly indifferent. The Vorthic delegates sat in their seats with what she could only interpret as smug satisfaction. Then humanity will act alone, she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the chamber. The council speaker's crystalline form pulsed with alarm. That would be most unwise, Ambassador. The Vorthic Empire is a significant military power. Your species would do well to remember its place in the galactic order. Kate Williams smiled, and several delegates shifted uneasily. They had learned that when humans smiled in certain ways, it was not always a sign of happiness. We will remember, she said simply, and left the chamber. Back on Earth, Captain Ryan Torres was briefing his first response team when the orders came through. He had been preparing for a routine patrol mission, but the encrypted message changed everything. He read it twice to make sure he understood correctly. All right, people, listen up, he announced to his team. New orders from the top. We're going to war. The room erupted in surprised voices. Humanity hadn't been in a real war since they joined the galactic community. There had been pirates and minor skirmishes, but nothing like this. The Kirani asked for help, Torres continued, and we're going to give it to them. Across Earth and the colonies, the same scene played out thousands of times. Reserve units were activated. Civilian ships were called in for retrofitting. Scientists were pulled from their research to work on military applications. The transformation was beginning. In her laboratory, Dr. Lisa Chun worked through the night analyzing every scrap of data about the Vorthic Empire. They were a warrior culture that had conquered 16 species in their rise to power. They were larger than humans, stronger, with natural armor plating and redundant organ systems. On paper, they were superior to humans in every physical way. But Dr. Chun had studied enough history to know that wars were not always won by the strongest. She pulled up files on human military history that had been classified since first contact. The Galactic Council had insisted that humanity put aside its warlike past to join the community of civilized species. Now, perhaps, it was time to remember what humans could do when pushed. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Command, watching the first reports come in. The entire human economy was shifting. Factory workers were volunteering for double shifts. Mining operations were expanding. The peaceful facade that humanity had maintained for 50 years was cracking, and underneath was something that made even Morrison uneasy. He had seen combat in the pirate conflicts, but this was different. This was the awakening of something that had been sleeping in the human spirit. The images from the Kirani homeworld had spread across human space like wildfire. Videos of Kirani children running from Vorthic soldiers, of burning cities and mass graves, of a peaceful people being systematically destroyed. Humans had always been emotional creatures by galactic standards. Where other species might debate the logical merits of intervention, humans saw suffering and responded with their hearts. But it was more than emotion driving them now. It was something deeper, something that connected to the very core of what made them human. The first volunteer recruitment center opened in New York City at noon. By sunset, the line stretched around 6 city blocks. Men and women of all ages stood in the rain, waiting for their chance to serve. Similar scenes played out in London, Moscow, Beijing, and every major city across human space. A reporter asked one volunteer, a middle-aged teacher named Paul, why he was enlisting. His answer would become a rallying cry across human space. Because they asked for help, he said simply. And when someone asks for help, you answer. In the depths of space, the Kirani distress signal continued to broadcast on repeat. But now, it was being heard. Now someone was coming. The galaxy didn't know it yet, but they were about to learn what happened when humanity decided that enough was enough. Admiral Morrison received the final report as the sun set over Luna Base. In 6 months, they would have the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. It wouldn't be enough by conventional military standards. The Vorthic Empire was too strong, too established. But Morrison looked at the determination in the eyes of his staff and knew that conventional standards had never applied to humans in a crisis. Send a message to the Kirani if you can, he ordered. Tell them to hold on. Help is coming. The die was cast. Humanity had made its choice. The peaceful species that had spent 50 years trying to fit into galactic civilization was about to remind the universe why they had needed to try so hard to be peaceful in the first place. The Kirani had cried for help, and humanity would answer with everything they had. The transformation of human space began with a single order from President Sarah Martinez. Wake up the sleeping giant. Within hours, dusty protocols that had been filed away for 50 years were activated. Emergency war powers that the Galactic Council never knew existed came into effect. Humanity had played the role of peaceful newcomer well, but now the mask was coming off. General Frank Davis stood in the war room of Earth Defense Command, watching as red lights bloomed across the holographic map of human space. Each light represented a military installation coming online, a dormant facility awakening from its long sleep. The other species thought humans had dismantled their war machine when they joined the galactic community. They were wrong. Humans had simply put it in storage. "Status report," Davis commanded, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of military service. "Mars shipyards are at full activation," reported Admiral Susan Park, her fingers dancing across her command console. "The mothballed fleet is being brought out of storage. First estimates show we can have 300 combat-ready vessels in 4 months. Make it 3 months," Davis replied. And that's just the start. Across the solar system, the same awakening was happening. On Titan, massive factories that had been producing consumer goods switched to weapons production overnight. The workers didn't complain about the longer hours or the dangerous conditions. They had seen the images from Kerani Prime Dot and the asteroid belt. Mining operations expanded at a rate that defied safety regulations. Humans needed raw materials for their ships, and they needed them now. When a mining supervisor on Ceres Station was asked about the risks, he simply pointed to a picture of Kerani children that someone had posted on the wall. "That's why," he said. Colonel Jake Miller stood before his Marine battalion in the training grounds of Camp Armstrong on the Moon. These were not regular soldiers. They were volunteers who had left their civilian lives behind when the call came. Teachers, doctors, engineers, artists, all united by a single purpose. "Listen up," Miller barked. "You've got 2 months to become the finest fighting force in the galaxy. The Vorthik have been conquering species for 300 years. They think they're unbeatable. We're going to prove them wrong." The training was brutal. Humans pushed their bodies to the limit and then pushed further. They studied Vorthik anatomy, learning every weakness in their natural armor. They practiced in environments that simulated the gravity and atmosphere of different worlds. They prepared for a kind of warfare the galaxy had never seen. Dr. Alan Brooks worked in a laboratory that hadn't been used since before first contact. He and his team were developing weapons that had been banned by human law for decades. Plasma. Weapons, antimatter bombs, biological agents tailored to Vorthik physiology. Nothing was off the table now. "The Galactic Council wanted us to forget how to wage war," Brooks muttered to his assistant as they reviewed the latest weapons test. "They're about to learn that humans never forget. We just choose not to remember." The changes weren't limited to the military. Every aspect of human society shifted to support the war effort. Schools began teaching basic combat medicine alongside mathematics. Children as young as 10 worked in factories after school, assembling components for weapons and ships. The elderly, who couldn't fight, found other ways to serve, organizing supply drives and communication networks. The Galactic Council watched with growing alarm as humanity transformed itself. Ambassador Kate Williams was summoned to an emergency session where she faced a chamber full of worried alien faces. "This mobilization is unprecedented," the council speaker said, its crystalline form pulsing with agitation. "Humanity is required to maintain peaceful relations with all council members." Kate Williams stood straight and looked the speaker directly in what passed for its eyes. "The Vorthik Empire is committing genocide. The council chose to do nothing. Humanity chooses differently. You risk war with a superior force," warned the Vorthik ambassador, a massive creature with scales like black steel. "Your species will be crushed." "Maybe," Williams admitted, "but we'll take a lot of you with us. And unlike you, we're fighting for something more than conquest." The Vorthik ambassador laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Sentiment. It will be your downfall." "We'll see," Williams said simply. Back on Earth, The first of the new warships rolled out of the Mars shipyards. They were ugly things, built for function over form. Humanity had studied every space battle in galactic history and learned from each one. These ships were designed to fight dirty, to use tactics that more civilized species would consider barbaric. Captain Amy Johnson stood on the bridge of her new command, the warship Righteous Fury. She had been a cargo hauler 6 months ago. No. She commanded enough firepower to crack a small moon. Around her, her crew prepared for war with grim determination. All stations report ready, her first officer announced. Johnson nodded. Then let's see what this bird can do. The ship's engines roared to life, and the Righteous Fury joined the growing fleet, assembling at the edge of human space. Every day, more ships arrived. Military vessels pulled from mothballs, civilian ships hastily converted for war, even private. Yachts fitted with weapons. If it could fly and fight, humanity was sending it. The transformation extended beyond hardware. Human culture itself was changing. Music became martial, with songs about justice and protection replacing pop melodies. Artists painted scenes of Kerani suffering and human determination. Writers penned stories of heroes who stood against impossible odds. The entire species was psyching itself up for war. In the training grounds, Private Maria Garcia learned combat medicine from doctors who had retrained as field medics. She had been studying to be a pediatric nurse before the call came. Now she learned how to keep soldiers alive in conditions that would kill most humans in seconds. Remember, her instructor said, you're not just saving human lives. We're going to be protecting Kerani civilians too. Learn their physiology. Their children are counting on us. That became the rallying cry across human space. Their children are counting on us. It appeared on posters, in speeches, in the prayers that people whispered before they slept. Humans had always been protective of their young, but that protection now extended to the innocent of another species entirely. The Vorthic Empire sent a diplomatic delegation to Earth, ostensibly to negotiate, but really to assess human preparations. They were shocked by what they found. Every human they met, from government officials to street cleaners, looked at them with barely concealed hatred. The images from Kerani Prime had done their work. The Vorthic commander, a veteran of dozens of conquests, reported back to his superiors with something approaching concern. The humans are not preparing for war in any conventional sense, he said. They are preparing for something else, something more total. Every one of them, from the smallest child to the eldest adult, has become part of their war machine. His superiors dismissed his concerns. After all, humans were a minor species with inferior technology and laughably small territory. What could they possibly do against the might of the Vorthic Empire? They would learn as the 6th month approached. Humanity's transformation was complete. Where once there had been a peaceful, scattered species trying to find its place in the galaxy, now there was something else. A unified force driven by righteous anger and protective fury. The sleeping giant hadn't just awakened, it had awakened angry. Admiral Morrison stood before the assembled fleet, the largest gathering of human military might in history. 3,000 ships of every size and configuration floated in formation, their crews ready for war. It wasn't enough by any logical measure. The Vorthic fleet was larger, more advanced, more experienced, but logic had never been humanity's strong suit when it came to protecting the innocent. All ships, Morrison broadcast, his voice reaching every human in the fleet, set course for Kerani space. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten those who cannot defend themselves. The fleet jumped to hyperspace as one, leaving behind a humanity that would never be the same. The peaceful facade was gone forever. In its place was something far more dangerous, a species that had remembered why it had worked so hard to be peaceful in the first place. Because When humans went to war, they didn't do it halfway. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kirani system to find hell waiting for them. The Vorthik had not been idle. Their warships hung in space like predatory insects, black and angular against the stars. 3 times the human fleet's size, with technology refined through centuries of conquest. By all rights, the humans should have turned and run. Instead, Captain Amy Johnson smiled. "All ships, this is righteous fury," she broadcast. "Remember your training. They expect us to fight like civilized beings. Let's disappoint them." The Vorthik. Commander watched his tactical display with confidence. The humans had arranged themselves in a standard battle formation, exactly as predicted. This would be over quickly. He ordered his fleet forward, weapons charging for the first volley that would cripple the human forces. Then the humans did something impossible. Their formation scattered in 300 different directions at once, like a school of fish avoiding a predator. Ships dove and weaved in patterns that made no tactical sense, burning through fuel reserves at an insane rate. "What are they doing?" his second-in-command asked. Before the commander could answer, he had his response. The human ships weren't fleeing. They were surrounding the Vorthik fleet from every possible angle. Where the Vorthik fought in elegant formations perfected over centuries, the humans fought like madmen, each ship acting independently, yet somehow in perfect coordination. Lieutenant Chris Brown gripped his rifle as his dropship screamed through the atmosphere of Kirani Prime. Below, the capital city burned. The Vorthik had been systematic in their cruelty, leaving just enough survivors to spread fear. His squad's mission was simple: secure a landing zone for the main force. The fact that said landing zone was currently occupied by a Vorthik battalion was considered a minor inconvenience. 30 seconds, the pilot announced, wrestling with the controls as anti-aircraft fire exploded around them. Brown looked at his squad. They were teachers and lawyers and store clerks who had become soldiers in 6 months. They should have been terrified. Instead, they looked eager. "Remember," Brown said, "we're not here to die for the Kirani. We're here to make the Vorthik die for trying to hurt them." The dropship hit the ground hard, its doors blowing open before it had even stopped moving. The humans poured out, not in the careful, measured advance the Vorthik expected, but in a screaming charge that caught the defenders completely off guard. The Vorthik had studied human military history. They knew about human tactics, their weapons, their capabilities. What they hadn't studied was human fury. They hadn't prepared for soldiers who fought not just to win, but to punish. Private First Class Maria Garcia worked in a field hospital set up in what had been a Kirani school. The small, delicate aliens looked at the humans with a mixture of hope and fear. They had called for help, but they hadn't expected this. The humans fought with a savagery that shocked even those they were saving. "It's okay," Garcia said softly, to a Kirani child as she treated its wounds. The child's large eyes, evolved for their world's dim sun, blinked up at her. "We're here now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." Outside, she could hear the battle raging. Human Marines had established a perimeter, and they were holding it against waves of Vorthik attacks. She had seen soldiers literally throw themselves at Vorthik warriors twice their size, trading their lives for just a few seconds of advantage. It wasn't logical. It wasn't smart. It was human. In space, Commander Paul White led his fighter squadron in another possible maneuver. The Vorthik fighters were faster, better armed, and piloted by warriors with decades of experience. So the humans didn't try to match them. Instead, they flew like lunatics, ramming when their weapons failed, using their own ships as missiles when needed. "Red Squadron, this is Red Leader," White called out as his fighter took another hit. "Remember, we're not here to survive. We're here to make them pay." His wingman, a former airline pilot named Susan, laughed over the comm. Copy that, Red Leader? Let's show these bastards what happens when you mess with kids. The Vorthic commander watched in growing horror as his tactical advantage evaporated. The humans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to hurt. Every human ship that died took 3 of his with it. Their ground forces threw themselves at his warriors with suicidal determination. They used tactics that no sane species would consider. They're insane, he muttered, watching another of his cruisers die to a human ship that had overloaded its own reactor and rammed. His second-in-command nodded. Shall we request reinforcements? From where? The commander asked bitterly. We brought 1/3 of the Empire's fleet. If we can't stop them with this... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. On the ground, the liberation of Kerani Prime continued city by city, block by block. The humans didn't just defeat the Vorthic forces. They hunted them. Every image of a dead Kerani child drove them to new heights of fury. Soldiers who ran out of ammunition used knives. When the knives broke, they used their bare hands. Captain Amy Johnson stood on her bridge, half her ship's systems dead or dying. They had hurt the Vorthic fleet badly, but the cost had been high. 1/3 of the human ships were gone, maybe more. But the Vorthic were pulling back, something they hadn't done in 300 years of conquest. Signal from the planet, Captain. Her communications officer reported. Colonel Brown reports the capital is secure. Kerani government representatives want to speak with our command. Johnson nodded. Put them through. The screen flickered to life, showing a Kerani elder. The alien's face was impossible for humans to read, but its voice carried emotion clearly. You came, it said simply. When all others turned away, you came. You asked for help, Johnson replied. That's what humans do. But the cost, the elder said, your people die for us. We are strangers to you. Johnson thought of all the volunteers back home, the children working in factories, the elderly manning support stations. She thought of humanity's choice to become something terrible in defense of the innocent. No, she said firmly. The moment you asked for help, you stopped being strangers. You became someone we protect. The battle for Kerani Prime took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of savage fighting that shocked the galaxy. The Vorthic had never faced an enemy like this. Every other species they had conquered had fought to preserve themselves. The humans fought to destroy. They took losses that would have broken any other fleet and kept coming. When it was over, when the last Vorthic ship fled the system, the cost was counted. Half the human fleet was gone. 30,000 human soldiers had died on Kerani Prime. By any measure, it was a disaster. But the Kerani were free. Their children were safe. And across the galaxy, other species took notice. The humans, the silly emotional humans who formed attachments too easily and cried at sad stories, had stood against one of the greatest military powers in the galaxy and made them run. Admiral Narration toured the battlefield in the aftermath, walking through cities where human and Kerani blood mixed in the streets. He stopped at a memorial where Kerani citizens had already begun placing flowers for fallen human soldiers. Was it worth it? His aide asked quietly. Morrison looked at a group of Kerani children playing in a park, their laughter a sound that had been absent for too long. He thought of the message that had started it all, the plea for help that humanity had answered. Ask me when this is over, he said. Because we're not done yet. The aide looked surprised. Sir, we've liberated Kerani Prime. Morrison's expression was hard as stone. The Vorthic Empire still exists. They still have conquered worlds. They'll do this again if we let them. He turned to his aide. Signal the fleet. What's left of it. We're going on the offensive. Sir, we don't have the ships for that. Then we'll get more, Morrison said simply. Earth is already building them. Every human colony is contributing. We asked for 6 months to prepare. The Vorthik gave us 3 weeks of combat experience. They have no idea what's coming now. As the battered human fleet prepared to leave Kerani space, they left behind a world forever changed. The Kerani had seen what other species considered impossible. They had seen a minor race challenge, a galactic. Power not for gain, not for glory, but because it was right. The galaxy would never be the same. The Vorthik Empire's response to their defeat at Kerani Prime was swift and brutal. They struck at 3 human colonies simultaneously, expecting to break humanity's will with overwhelming force. They had studied human history and believed that attacking civilian targets would force a surrender. They were wrong. President John Harris stood before the emergency session of the United Earth Government. The images from New Haven, Prosperity, and Eden's Landing played behind him. Burning cities, dead civilians, destroyed homes. The representatives sat in stunned silence. "They think this will make us stop," Harris said quietly. His voice carried to every corner of the chamber and across every human world. "They think we'll trade Kerani lives for human lives. They think we'll back down." He paused, his eyes hard as flint. "They don't understand us at all. The vote was unanimous. Total war. Within hours, every human between the ages of 16 and 60 was registered for war service. Those who couldn't fight would build. Those who couldn't build would support. Children younger than 16 worked in the factories after school. The elderly managed logistics and communications. There were no civilians anymore. There were only humans united in purpose. Admiral Linda Scott stood in the newly constructed Strategic Operations Center on Mars. The wall before her showed the entire galaxy, with Vorthik territory marked in red. It was vast, encompassing 16 conquered species and hundreds of worlds. By comparison, human space was a tiny cluster of dots. "Traditional military doctrine says this is impossible," her staff officer reported. "We're outnumbered 50 to 1. Their technology is superior. Their warriors are physically stronger." Scott smiled coldly. "Good thing we're not using traditional doctrine then. Show me their supply lines." The display changed, revealing the complex network that kept the Vorthik Empire functioning. Supply depots, fuel stations, communication relays. "The arteries of Empire. We're going to make them bleed," Scott announced. "Every convoy, every supply ship, every isolated outpost. We're going to hit them everywhere at once." Major Tony Rodriguez led the first of the new Special Forces teams. They weren't soldiers in any conventional sense. They were hunters. Their mission was simple: infiltrate Vorthik space and cause as much damage as possible. No rules, no restrictions, no mercy. "Remember," Rodriguez told his team as they prepared to enter enemy territory, "we're not trying to occupy. We're trying to hurt, make them afraid to sleep, make them look over their shoulders, make them understand that nowhere is safe." The campaign that followed shocked the galaxy. Human ships appeared from nowhere, struck at vital targets, and vanished before the Vorthik could respond. They used tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They poisoned water supplies. They sabotaged life support systems. They turned the Vorthik's own weapons against them. Dr. Emma Jones worked in a field hospital on the front. Lines treating wounded soldiers who should have been dead. Human medical science had advanced more in 6 months of war than in the previous 50 years. They had to. The Vorthik weapons were designed to kill, and humans needed to survive long. Enough to keep fighting. "Doctor, this one's too far gone," a nurse said, indicating a soldier who had lost most of his lower body to a plasma blast. Jones looked at the soldier. He was maybe 20 years old, a volunteer from Earth's African Federation. His eyes were Still conscious, still determined. No one's too far gone, Jones said firmly. Not while they still want to fight. 6 hours of surgery later, the soldier was stabilized. He'd never walk again, but he'd live. More importantly, he'd be able to work in the factories, building weapons for those who could still fight. Every human life saved was another piece of the war machine. The Vorthic Empire began to fracture. Worlds that had been conquered generations. Ugo saw opportunity in their master's distraction. Rebellions sparked across the empire, inspired by humanity's example. The Vorthic had to split their forces, fighting both the relentless human attacks and their own subjects. In the Galactic Council chambers, Ambassador Kate Williams faced a room full of increasingly nervous representatives. The other species had watched humanity's transformation with growing alarm. What had started as a noble rescue mission had become something else entirely. This must stop, the council speaker said. Humanity's actions threaten the stability of the entire galaxy. Williams stood calmly, her voice carrying clearly. The Vorthic threatened that stability when they committed genocide, or simply finishing what they started. You're becoming like them, accused the representative from the Altari Collective. Your species is becoming something monstrous. No, Williams corrected. We're becoming what we need to be. And when the Vorthic Empire is broken, when the species they've conquered are free, we'll become peaceful again. But not before. The war economy on Earth and the colonies had reached levels that defied comprehension. Entire cities had been converted to weapon production. The Mars shipyards were producing a new warship every 3 days. Children sang war songs as they worked in the factories. The elderly taught classes on Vorthic anatomy and weaknesses. Humanity had become a single organism with a single purpose. Victory. Captain Amy Johnson, promoted to admiral after Kirani Prime, led the assault on the Vorthic industrial world of Korthax. It was supposed to be impregnable, protected by orbital defense platforms, and a fleet twice the size of her attack force. Admiral, their defenses are too strong, her tactical officer warned. We'll lose half our ships before we even reach orbit. Johnson studied the display. Then she turned to her crew. Signal the volunteer ships. From behind the main fleet, a wave of smaller vessels appeared. Civilian ships, cargo haulers, even private yachts. All piloted by volunteers who knew they wouldn't be coming back. For the children, came the broadcast from the lead volunteer ship. Then they accelerated to full speed, heading straight for the defense platforms. The Vorthic defenders couldn't believe what they were seeing. The human ships weren't trying to fight. They were simply ramming, using their own vessels as missiles. The defense platforms, designed to repel military attacks, couldn't handle suicide runs from 100 directions at once. Johnson closed her eyes as the volunteer ships died, taking the platforms with them. When she opened them, Korthax's defenses were broken. All ships, she commanded, her voice thick with emotion. Make their sacrifice count. The fall of Korthax sent shockwaves through the Vorthic Empire. It wasn't just a military defeat. It was proof that humans would pay any price for victory. The Vorthic had conquered species for centuries, but they had never faced an enemy willing to die just to hurt them. On Earth, President Harris received reports of the mounting casualties. 300,000 humans dead. Entire families wiped out. The old Earth would have sued for peace long ago. But this wasn't the old Earth. Double production, he ordered, and lower the service age to 15. Sir, his advisor protested, that's their children. Harris looked at the images from Kirani Prime, at the alien children humanity had saved. Then he looked at the images from the human colonies the Vorthic had attacked. They stopped being children when the Vorthic made this total war, he said quietly. Every human is a soldier now. That's what total war means. The advisor nodded slowly. He had a 15-year-old daughter. Tomorrow, she would be in the factories. Because that's what humanity had chosen. Not victory at any cost, but justice. At any cost, the Vorthic Empire sent another diplomatic mission, this time to sue for peace. They offered to withdraw from Kirani space, to pay reparations, to sign non-aggression pacts. Anything to make the humans stop. Admiral Morrison met them in the ruins of one of their own colonies, now liberated by human forces. He listened to their offers in silence, then spoke. "You had 16 conquered species under your control," he said. "When all of them are free, when your military is dismantled, when you can never threaten another innocent life again, then we'll talk about peace." "That's not peace," the Vorthic ambassador protested. "That's annihilation of our empire." Morrison nodded. "Yes, it is." The war continued, growing more savage with each passing month. But something else was happening too. The species the Vorthic had conquered were rising up, inspired by humanity's example. The Kirani, once pacifists, were building their own weapons. Other species joined the fight. Humanity had started alone. But their willingness to die for strangers had lit a fire across the galaxy. The Vorthic Empire, which had stood for 1,000 years, was burning. And in the factories of Earth, children sang songs of justice as they built the weapons that would finish the job. The final assault on the Vorthic homeworld began on a cold morning in Earth's calendar year, 2159. 2 years had passed since the Kirani's cry for help. 2 years of total war that had transformed humanity and shaken the galaxy to its foundations. Now, the combined fleets of humanity and 17 liberated species hung in space above the world that had spawned an empire of conquest. Jack Morrison stood on the bridge of the UE's Vengeance, formerly the Righteous Fury, renamed after Captain Amy Johnson's death at the Battle of Essex. Around him, a fleet of 10,000 ships waited for his order. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. "Sir, the Vorthic are broadcasting," his communications officer reported. Morrison nodded. "Put them through." The image that appeared showed the Vorthic's supreme commander, the same one who had laughed at humanity's threats 3 years ago. He looked different now, defeated. "Admiral Morrison," the commander began, his voice lacking its former arrogance. "I offer unconditional surrender. We will disarm. We will pay reparations. We will free all remaining subject species. Please, just spare our world." Morrison studied the alien for a long moment. Behind the commander, he could see other Vorthic. Not warriors, but civilians, families, children. "Your surrender is accepted," Morrison said finally. "But understand this. Humanity will oversee your disarmament. We will station peacekeepers on your world for the next century. You will never again have the capacity to threaten another species. Do you understand?" The Vorthic commander's shoulders slumped in defeat. "We understand." "Good," Morrison said. Then, more gently, "Commander, we never wanted this. We asked you to stop. The Galactic Council asked you to stop. You chose to continue. Remember that. The occupation of the Vorthic homeworld was swift and efficient. Human soldiers who had spent 2 years learning to hate now had to learn to be peacekeepers. It wasn't easy. Many had lost family and friends to Vorthic attacks. But orders were orders, and humanity would not become what it had fought against. Elder Keeper Zara of the Kirani stood with Ambassador Kate Williams in the ruins of the Galactic Council chambers. The old order had collapsed during the war. 2. Many species had chosen sides. Too many old alliances had been broken. Something new would have to be built. "Your species has paid a terrible price," Zara said softly. 800,000 dead. An entire generation traumatized by war. Was it worth it? Williams looked out at the stars. Ask the children playing in the parks of the 17 worlds we liberated. Ask the species who will never again fear Vorthic conquest. Ask the next bully who thinks about attacking someone who can't defend themselves. You've changed, Zara observed. Humanity is no longer the species that joined the Council 50 years ago. No, Williams agreed. We tried to be what the galaxy wanted. Peaceful, harmless, civilized. But when push came to shove, when innocent lives were at stake, we remembered what we really are. And what is that? Williams smiled sadly. Protectors. It's not a comfortable truth, but it's our truth. We're the species that will burn itself to ashes if that's what it takes to save others. The reconstruction began immediately. Human engineers, who had spent 2 years perfecting weapons of war, now turned their skills to rebuilding. The same factories that had produced bombs now made medical equipment. The shipyards that had built warships now constructed cargo vessels to carry aid. Kerani Prime, a monument, was unveiled in the capital. It showed a human soldier shielding a Kerani child, both figures reaching toward the stars. The inscription, written in every language of the former Vorthic Empire, read, "They cried for help, and help came." Dr. Emma Jones, now head of the Galactic Medical Exchange, worked to spread human medical advances across the freed worlds. The technologies developed to save human soldiers now saved lives across the galaxy. It was a small comfort for the cost paid. "Doctor," her assistant said, "the Vorthic delegation is here for their medical training." Jones nodded. Part of the surrender terms included sharing technology with the former empire. It was controversial. Many humans wanted the Vorthic to suffer. But humanity's leadership understood that lasting peace required healing, not vengeance. Vorthic doctor who entered was young, part of the generation that had grown up during the war. He looked at Jones with something between fear and awe. "I am here to learn," he said simply. "Then let's begin," Jones replied. "The first lesson is this: every life has value. Enemy or ally, strong or weak. That's what humans believe. That's why we fought. Years passed. The children who had worked in the war factories grew up and had children of their own. They told stories of the time when all humanity stood as one, when their species had done the impossible. But they also taught their children to cherish peace, to remember the cost of war. President John Harris, now elderly, gave his final address to the United Earth government. Behind him hung pictures of the war's casualties, a reminder of the price of intervention. "We answered a call for help," he said. "We transformed ourselves into something terrible to save the innocent. We won. But victory came at a cost that should never be paid again. Let future generations remember both parts of that truth." In the new Galactic Assembly that replaced the old Council, humanity held a unique position. They were not the strongest species, nor the most advanced, but they were the ones others looked to when difficult decisions had to be made. They were the protectors, the ones who had proven they would pay any price to defend the innocent. Former Vorthic Commander Krex, now an old alien teaching history to mixed species classes, would often tell his students about the war, about how his people had built an empire on conquest and cruelty, about how they had thought themselves invincible. Then the humans came, he would say, not for conquest, not for glory, but because someone asked for help. They transformed their entire civilization, sacrificed their innocence, and broke a 1,000-year empire. Not because they had to, but because it was right. Were they heroes? A young student would inevitably ask. Krex would consider the question carefully. They were humans, he would answer. They did what humans do. They protected those who couldn't. Protect themselves. Whether that makes them heroes or something else, each of you must decide. On Earth, the memorial to the war dead stretched for miles. 800,000 names carved in stone, each representing a human who had chosen to answer a stranger's call for help. Families visited, leaving flowers and tears, but also pride. Their loved ones had died for something greater than themselves. Ambassador. Kate Williams, retired now, would often walk among the memorial stones. She remembered the young woman who had stood before the Galactic Council, full of hope for peaceful cooperation. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that peace sometimes required a terrible price. A young human approached her one day, a student studying galactic history. Ambassador, do you regret it? What we became during the war? Williams looked at the endless rows of names, and at the stars above, where 17 species lived free because of humanity's choice. Regret is the wrong word, she said finally. We did what we had to do. We became what we needed to become. The galaxy learned that humans are not to be underestimated, that we will not stand by while innocents suffer. That knowledge has prevented 3 wars in the last decade alone. So it was worth it? William sighed. 800,000 human lives. An entire generation scarred by war. The loss of our innocence as a species. But 17 species free. Billions of lives saved. And a galaxy that now thinks twice before preying on the weak. She turned to the student. You tell me, was it worth it? The student had no answer. Perhaps there was none. As the years turned to decades, humanity slowly healed. The war factories became schools. The soldiers became teachers and builders. The species that had turned itself into a weapon learned to be peaceful again. But the capability remained, sleeping but not gone. The galaxy knew it now. Humans were peaceful by choice, not by nature. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, on worlds that had once known only oppression, children played in freedom. They learned stories of the strange species from a distant world who had answered their cry for help, who had transformed themselves into warriors to save strangers, who had proven that sometimes someone will stand up to the bullies of the universe. The Kerani had cried for help. Humanity had responded with total war. The galaxy would never forget either fact. In the end, perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Not the defeat of the Vorthic Empire, but the message sent to every corner of the galaxy. The innocent are not alone. When they cry for help, someone will answer. And if that someone is humanity, the response will be total.